there is a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. And that's why we are on the trail of the Nephilim. I'm your intrepid host, L.A. Marzulli. Tim Alberino joins us, which is always a special occasion. And we'll get into that interview. He just got back from Peru. I'm sure you're going to find this interesting. First, a word from our trusted sponsor. Gold has surged 46% in less than a year, doubling the gains of NASDAQ and S&P 500. But this isn't just another rally. Global reserves are shifting, exposing cracks in the monetary system. Investors are losing confidence in paper gold and demanding physical metal, creating a massive gap between gold owned and gold available. But this isn't about how institutions broke yet another system. It's about how you can profit from it. Right now, Noble Gold Investments has a limited supply of investment-grade gold bars and coins available. As banks scramble to fulfill their obligations, pushing gold prices even higher, you can profit. Smart investors are already moving into physical gold. Noble Gold Investments makes it easy for you to do the same. And right now, when you make a qualified investment, Noble Gold will add a free 10th ounce gold coin to your order. Folks, there's always a risk with any investment that you may consider, but don't wait until it's too late. Visit www.noblegoldinvestments.com and turn their panic into your profit. Again, noblegoldinvestments.com, noblegoldinvestments.com. We did it a couple of years ago, and folks, I'm really glad we did. noblegoldinvestments.com. Tim Alberino, thanks for coming on the record. So great to have you here, and thanks for carving out some time for us. So you just got back from Peru. So what's the latest?
Well, it's always a pleasure to be with you, LA. Yeah, I got back from Peru about 3 weeks ago, and I was down there. There's several different things going on that drew me back to Peru. But one of those things has to do with the alleged alien mummies that have been in the news recently and have been around for probably about 7-8 years now.
I remember.
And so I was invited by one of the professors from the University of Ica to come down and look at the mummies that they have, including the larger one called Maria that's been featured in various documentaries. Gaia TV, for example, featured this mummy and others. And Dr. Roger Zuniga invited me to come down to Peru, to come to the Ica University and study these mummies. In fact, he told me that he was going to give me access to analyze them however I wanted, even if I wanted to take samples. But this trip was sort of a preliminary trip. I just wanted to just get up close to these mummies and see what my first impressions were before I would, do anything further, do any kind of analyses. I did that, and then I also went and looked at some potential new megalithic sites in the jungle. So that's what I was doing in Peru. I was also filming for a documentary. Mike Cernovich is producing a documentary called Meaning, and they wanted me to take them up the Amazon, up into the jungle where I was living intermittently with a family up there in the jungle. And so that was fun. We did that also. It was quite a wild trip.
It's always, every time you go to Peru, it's a wild trip.
Yeah.
It's just, I haven't been down there since 2019 when COVID hit right after that. And that's it. So I just haven't been back down. And with all the political intrigue, it's like, But let's talk about the mummies. I was at a conference with Jaime Maussan, and we love Jaime Maussan. Jaime Maussan's a friend of the show. And Jaime was going, LA, you need to go down there. They're real. And I'm going, Jaime, they look like a construct. They look like, things were put together. There's, from the x-rays that I've seen, it reminds me of the ferry, which we debunked, but, we all got taken. So why am I going to go back down there again? What were your thoughts when you saw the mummies?
Okay. So, as I said before, these mummies have been around for quite some time.
Right.
I think, like I said, 7-8 years. So it's nothing new. And I've always kept my distance from these things. I've never got involved. I didn't even want to comment until I had an opportunity to go myself and analyze them. I, as you are, am very cautious about artifacts that come out of Central and South America.
Yes.
There are a lot of hoaxes
Many hoax.
industry. It's a hoaxing industry.
I agree.
And Peru and Mexico are the two worst offenders.
Yep.
And there's millions of dollars that exchange hands for both real and fake artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
So it's there's a lot of money involved, and so I'm always very cautious. I always pump the brakes on artifacts from Peru and Mexico, and generally speaking, from Central and South America. So the first thing we need to understand about these mummies is there are various different kinds, and there's a lot of them. I was told at the university that there were 150 mummies discovered, 150 from the same site. And they were discovered underground. Allegedly, they were discovered by a vaquero, by a grave robber. But the origin story of the mummies is very nebulous.
Yeah,
that's very convoluted.
There you go.
And I know I have sort of the inside scoop on it because I heard about these mummies back in 2018. Well, I heard about them previous to that, but I was working with an archaeologist in 2018, 2019, who was involved in the early days of the discovery of these mummies, and it's just crazy. The details, the intrigue, it gets really, really nuts. And so there's a lot of disinformation about the origin of these mummies in regard to where they were discovered that has been purposely proliferated by the guy who discovered them, because he doesn't want more vaqueros to go. And he thinks there's a whole lot more there. I've talked to him, and he and I have some very interesting. We have some very interesting connections, and anyway, so just understand there's a lot of them for the audience, and the origin story of these things is convoluted at best. It's convoluted. Jaime Maussan is in the middle of this thing.
I know.
He's poured a lot of money into this. There's various teams have studied these things. We're talking professional people from scientists from Japan, I think from Spain, and certainly from the United States as part of Jaime's team. Some very prestigious individuals from the United States went down, and they were not given access to the little mummies, only the big ones. So having said that, there's the little mummies, which are, like 2 feet tall, maybe, right? 1 to 2 feet tall. And then there's the big mummies, and the big mummies are, they probably stand. I mean, they're in the fetal position. The big mummies are in the fetal position, just like the Paracus nobility, right? You're very familiar with that. The Paracus nobility are usually discovered inside of mummy bundles,
right?
Inside of that elaborate fabric. And when you open the fabric up, they're in the fetal position, right? Because they're being birthed into the afterlife. So that's how the mummies are, the large ones. The little mummies are these little rigid things, and they're just sort of like, they look like dolls, and they are, there's a lot of those. Those are the ones that Jaime featured in his press conference in Mexico that just went wild on social media. And a lot of people sort of stepped back. They stepped away from the story because it looked, fake as all get out. Those little mummies.
The little guys really look fake. I get it.
Yeah. So the University of Ica has 4 out of the 100+ mummies that there are. Nobody knows where they all are, by the way. They're sort of all spread out all over the place, but the university has 4. It has 3 little ones and 1 big one. So I went to the university. The mummies are there. I mean, they're there in these glass cases. And I talked to the professors, and they had them under this cloth, and they opened up the cloth, and there were the mummies. I walked up to the mummies, and the first thing I did was I walked up to Maria / Mario, by the way. This mummy, originally it was thought that it was a female, and now they're saying it could be a male, so they call it Mario. And then some people are out there saying it's a hermaphrodite.
Oh.
But for our purposes, Maria, and she's a larger one. I walked up to Maria, and I got to tell you, LA, even with my experience in Peru and having this firewall up for artifacts in Mexico and Peru,
right? Sure.
I'm incredulous, right? I walk up to the display, and I thought, oh my God, I think this is real.
Whoa.
That was my thought. I think this one's real. I think this thing was living and breathing. That was my initial thought when I walked up to it. it does not look fake to me. And I mean, I didn't do any kind of analysis on it because there's all kinds of data that's already been collected from these other teams that have done MRI scans, X-rays, and DNA collection. They've even dissected pieces of these mummies. They've cut into the fingers. And of course, I should explain that these are the tridactyl mummies,
Right.
the so-called tridactyl mummies. They have 3 long fingers and 3 long toes. I have images of them. I should have sent them to you. And if I could share my screen and show you images, or I can give them to you and you can put them in later. But so the large mummy, I looked at that one first, and I was very impressed. And we'll talk about some features on that mummy that are very interesting. But then I looked over at the smaller display cases, at the those little mummies, and I was very unimpressed. Those I got the distinct sensation that those are, and I'm not going to use the word fake. I don't think they're fake, and I don't think they're hoaxes. The little ones, I think they're effigies. I think they're dolls that were buried with the big ones
Right.
that are representative of the big ones.
Yep.
And they look like composites to me, and they're very rigid, and they don't look like, you don't get the sense that they were ever living and breathing, the little ones. It's a totally different presentation. The big one in the fetal position, and then these little rigid guys. One of them's like in the seated position. He's like sitting, and his arms are out, and it just looks like really rigid. And this one was missing his head, and then they had a little one like the ones that Jaime has with the head, and it just doesn't look to me like functional anatomy, the little ones. But the big one, the big one is a totally different story.
Let me ask you something. You talked about cutting into them. I mean, if they open one up, you're gonna find out real quick whether it's a construct. I mean, have they done that? Have they dissected one?
They have. So, okay, so let's talk about the American team that went down.
Okay.
I think the guys, I think it's was led by I think his name is John McDowell. Very well respected, renowned forensic, and I always forget what he is. He's a forensic something or other, but he's very well respected. He's not like a UFO guy or anything like that. He went down there. Jaime invited him because he's one of the most respected guys here in the United States to analyze stuff like this, and he had access. Interestingly enough, I heard him talking about this on an interview. He said he was never, oddly enough, he was never given access to the small ones, which I thought was interesting. The big ones.
Huh.
And you can look at the small ones. I mean, they'll let you see anything over there in the University of Ica if they invite you to come. And I thought that was strange. He was only allowed to analyze the large ones. And he said that they've done, I don't know if his team did, I think his team did MRI and DNA analyses, and it's been subjected to X-ray by their team and by other teams. So you got MRI data, X-ray, DNA analysis, all the data that has been collected by the different organizations that have researched these things is free online. Nobody's hiding anything. And that's a good sign. It's all free online. I forget the name of the website, but it's out there. All the data is there. You can look at the MRIs. You can look at the X-rays. The DNA analysis of the large mummies is 30% human, 70% anomalous.
Wow.
70% anomalous. And I was talking to the professors. Every professor I talked to in the University of Ica, every single one of them, I asked them, do you believe these things were living, breathing beings at one time in the past? Every one of them, yes, absolutely. And I said, well, why? Why do you think that? Because the data is conclusive. That's what they all told me. The data. And there's a lot of data. And these guys, the professors, believe that the little ones were living, breathing creatures also, but not the American team. McDowell, he said that he doesn't believe the little ones were living, breathing. He thinks the big ones might have been. These guys are very careful, but he thinks the big ones might have been. But the little ones strike him, just like me, as dolls. So like legitimate ancient artifacts So they're not hoaxes,
Right.
but they're effigies of the big ones.
Right.
And who knows what sort of purpose they serve being buried with the big ones. And he said that their anatomy, when he said he wasn't given access to the little ones, but he's seen them. And he said that the anatomy of the little ones, he says that thing could never have walked around. It just wouldn't have worked. The anatomy, it's too rigid. The joints don't work. The proportions are off. The body form, the body plan is not functional. But he said the big ones, the data is unimpeachable. I mean, the MRI scans of the large ones. They have found, this is what they have all concluded. All the scientific teams that looked at these things have concluded. They're not going to say these are non-human beings. This is the biggest discovery in human history. No, but what they will say, and what they all say, is we have not discovered any evidence that would suggest that these are fake or hoaxed. There's no epoxy holding the joints together.
Right.
There's nothing in them that's not tissue and bone. And the way that the way that the structure for those 3 fingers and 3 toes, the way that the bone structure meshes into the arm, it's all very natural. It's a natural body plan. And they think that it would be virtually impossible to hoax. So I interviewed Dr. Zuniga, and Dr. Roger Zuniga. He's a Peruvian guy. He's a professor at the University of Ica. He is sort of in charge of the mummies. He's the curator of these mummies at the museum. There's a lot more out there, but the ones at the museum, Zuniga is the curator, and he knows the most about them. And I was impressed with Zuniga. He was a very intelligent, thoughtful guy, and we talked for a while, and he just rattled off to me all of the different tests that have been performed on these mummies, all of them. And he said, some of these mummies have implants. And some of the implants are in the chest. One of the mummies, the large one, has a gold implant right in the middle of the forehead. And he said that there's 2 things about these implants that we've discovered. Number one, the implants have the bone and the tissue were growing over the implants, which means that they were there when the tissue was alive, right? It's because the bone has to grow over them, and so the bone grew over the implants. And number 2, the implants contain, at least one of the implants, if not all of them, I can't recall, contain a metal that has only recently been discovered, an alloy that's only recently been discovered. Oh my God, it's osmium. And he said that osmium only has one use in the modern world. It's used in technological communication devices. That's it. And he said that no one's ever discovered osmium in ancient artifacts. So this is all very strange. So if somebody faked these mummies, why would they put osmium implants? That doesn't make any sense.
Doesn't make sense. I agree.
So, and there's a lot of information. He said, we have more, human beings have more in common with these beings, with these tridactyls, they call them. We have more in common with a papaya, genetically speaking, he told me, than with these beings, because we share 40% of our DNA with a papaya.
Right.
And he said, we only share 30% of our DNA with these things. And he was very impressive. He rattled off he knows it by heart. All of the test results that have been done, all of the results of those tests, every team that's come and researched them. I mean, he was very impressive. I was very impressed. And he really believes, because I told him, Dr. Zuniga, I get the impression that the little ones are effigies of the big ones, that they were never alive, then that they're composites of other creatures. Because there's really, I think, pretty strong evidence that the head of the little mummies, those little rigid mummies,
right,
that the part of the skull is a llama skull. I don't know if you've seen that, but I think it's conclusive. It's very compelling that part of the skull is a llama skull. And I told him that. And he said, I understand why you feel that way, but the problem is all of the testing that we've done on the little ones, he told me, suggests that they're real. And he said, all I can do is go with the data. He said, that's all I can tell you. He said, I personally believe all of these mummies were alive.
Wow.
And I still don't. I mean, even though Zuniga is convinced they all are, I just standing there looking at these little things, I'm just like,
happening.
no.
When Jaime had the X-rays for the little ones, remember that when he revealed it?
Yeah, the press.
Took an X-ray over to an X-ray technician over in the UK, and this guy took one look at them and said, "Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this," and these were copies of the original X-rays, so they were kind of a little blurry, and he debunked it within 15 minutes.
Yeah,
yeah, 15, the little guys. Let me ask you, what's the provenance with the big guys? Where are these things coming out of?
Okay, well, I have to be careful because they were found under the ground. And it's clear to me that the professors don't really know. They say that all of the mummies came from a huaquero, from a grave robber. And this grave robber's name is Mario. And he went to jail. The Ministry of Culture put him in jail for a year. And because he was, because of, I think it had something to do with these mummies. And so,
wow,
that's the story that all the professors have. But I don't think that story is entirely true, because the guy who found them, he's a French, I hesitate to say his name, but he's a French explorer who's lived in Peru for 30 plus years. His name is Thierry Jamin. And I have a lot of respect for this dude. He's been looking for the lost city of the Inca for years. He is a serious explorer. Wow. And he's got a great team. It's called Inkari. And he and I have been talking, and he told me a different story about the origin of these mummies. And I'm not, he hasn't publicized it. He doesn't talk about it because I think he doesn't want to get in trouble with the Ministry of Culture. I don't blame him. He's trying to keep the Ministry of Culture, away from him. And so I'm just going to say that there's a different story. And even the professors don't know the origin story. They think it all came from huaqueros. And I don't think so. But I will tell you this. He told me the conditions, the environment that the mummies were discovered in.
Okay.
And you'll recall when we were in Peru, you were in Peru with me in 2019, and we were over at Chongos. Remember, we flew our drone around the Chongos Pyramid?
Sure.
And we discovered two intersecting tunnels 100 feet beneath the pyramid, artificial. We were looking for them. Remember, trying to get them under the pyramid. They were so large you could drive a semi-truck through them. And the mummies were found in a tunnel like that.
Wow.
And where you read, if you read there was a Daily Mail article published today about these mummies, where scientists are saying that the bodies are conclusively 100% real. But that's the Daily Mail, so take that for whatever it's worth. But and specifically the larger ones. And now what's really, really, really intriguing here, you and I have both handled and studied the elongated skulls. You guys did a very intensive DNA analysis of them. We did a much smaller. We just did a couple teeth, but we both got basically the same results, that the Paracus culture is not native to Peru. It migrated.
Correct.
I mean, case closed. Right. You guys did your great analysis on that. I think you guys proved definitively that the Paracus, that somebody migrated from over the sea and intermingled with one of the native cultures living there in the Paracus region, and that's where you get the Paracus culture. And you guys had a suite of haplogroups, and our haplogroup was M, and haplogroup M has a broad distribution, but nowhere to be found in the Americas. It's like the one place haplogroup M isn't is in the Americas.
There you go.
So it's.
Ew.
But anyways, I was going to say the I think now I'm going to enter a realm of speculation here, but the first thing that struck me when I walked up to the display case with Maria is she has an elongated skull. She has an elongated skull that looks exactly like the Paracus elongated skulls, like exactly the same.
Wow.
And some of them have bigger elongated skulls than Maria. Maria's elongated skull is actually less accentuated than some of the other larger mummies. They have like really big elongated skulls, almost like the Chongo skull, some of them.
Right, right.
But Maria's is elongated, and she has the large eyes, really large eyes, real small nose. And the Paracus skulls, the ones that we think are genetic, have those extra large orbital sockets. There you go. Just like that. There you go.
Might as well bring it up.
That's what Maria looks like. Okay. But her eyes are even larger. Her eyes are even larger. And one of the really bizarre things is she has puckered lips. And the professor was telling me, Zuniga was telling me that one of the really strange things about these mummies is they have puckered lips like an ape, he told me, like a chimpanzee or a gorilla. So, I mean, these things are really weird looking, and their eyes are huge. They're bigger than the Paracus skulls. But I'm standing there staring at this thing again, 3 fingers, 3 toes, and I can't help but wonder if these things were alive and breathing, and by the way, they had the carbon-14 testing done on them.
I was just about to ask you on that.
And they're let's say they're between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago they were living.
Well, that's
about 1,000, 2,000 years ago. So right in there in the Paracus culture.
right.
Okay.
I agree.
So they were discovered in the Nazca Paracus area. So in that area, Pulpa.
Okay.
So in that general area is where they were discovered. So if these things were alive, sucking air on Earth, and they were walking around in the desert there at one time, at some time 1,000+ years ago, were they breeding with the native people?
Right.
Were they breeding with the Paracus people who came over from the ocean, across the ocean?
Right.
And is that the origin of the elongation of the skulls of the Paracus people? The nobility? Because I think you guys would agree that some of those skulls, many of them do show signs of cranial deformation, but some of them do not. And some of those Paracus elongated skulls, I think, are the result of genetic variation.
I do too. And that's our whole DNA thing. I mean, this is inside, it's genetic. Whatever we're looking at is a genetic anomaly. What do you think we're looking at? What do you think? I mean, this is conjecture. I know you're going to speculate. Are we looking at a hybrid? Are we looking at, I mean, this is really bizarre. There's nothing else that even comes close to it, that's ever been discovered. So we're looking at something that's not only anomalous, but is incredibly strange. What do you think it is?
I think the hybrid is the Paracus people. I think at this point, I'm, and this is, again, as you say, this is just conjecture, but
Right.
It wouldn't surprise me if it turns out that the Paracus elongated skull, the noble class that are genetically different than Homo sapien, that they are the result of interbreeding between these tridactyls and the native cultures and the Paracus people. They interbreed, they create this noble class, and they have some of the features of the tridactyls: the elongation of the skull, the overly large orbital sockets. So what are these tridactyl things? By the way, they don't have ears. They have like just holes for ears. They didn't have regular ears. And there's a handful of other anomalous features about these things. Nobody really know. I asked about the organs, by the way, and Zuniga told me that's the one thing they're not sure about yet, is the organs, what the organs are like, or were like, because these are desiccated. They're not really mummies. They're desiccated bodies, so they're dried out. They're just they're just dry.
So the organs should be there.
They should be there.
Yeah.
And now it's turning out that one of them seems to be pregnant. So what are they? I have no idea. I mean, I guess we could speculate that they're either from here or they're not. In other words, they're either from the Earth or they're not. And if they're from the Earth, are we looking at some sort of a crypto-terrestrial species
Yeah.
that's been inhabiting, maybe subterranean. The one thing that came to mind when I was staring at this thing was Vril, the Vril. Remember the Nazis believed
Oh
that
yeah,
there was
sure.
a race
Right.
of beings living, inhabiting the underworld, inhabiting like a Hollow Earth type situation.
Right.
And they were looking for them, and they were actively trying to make contact with this race. And they really believed that the Vril existed. And I'm thinking to myself, maybe they do. I mean, maybe there was, and perhaps is a subterranean species, non-human species that's been interacting with different cultures throughout history and interbreeding in the case of the Paracus people. And remember, the Paracus people, they were quasi-subterranean. They were living under the
Very much so. Yeah, very much so.
and
we yeah. So, remember when we were on the reserve, I'll never forget that. And the archaeologists, and I look at them and go, well, okay, how did they see down there? Is there any evidence of torchlight or mirrors? Oh, no, nothing like that. And now we know that they probably had some kind of night vision, which is bizarre in itself. I mean, where Jaime invited me down there, like, I don't know, 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, whenever it was, last time I saw Jaime, and I just kind of shined them on. And the reason for this was everybody who saw the ferry, everybody, okay, and this is, they look at me as like, oh, Marzulli got fooled by a hoax. Everybody got fooled by the hoax, okay? If you're really going to be honest and not just point fingers at me, or Marzulli, which a bunch of people did, but the bottom line is, all the medical people, Jaime did DNA testing down there with the ferry. All the medical people, all the geneticists, all the X-ray technicians, everybody thought it was real. Then when we got the thing, we all thought it was real. We had 3 veterinarians that Saturday morning. I'll never forget it. And they're all looking at the X-rays and handling this thing and taking it out of the jar. Everybody thought it was real until, right? And what
it fell apart,
right? It all fell apart. So what I don't understand, if they have so many, they need to take one of the big guys and just, put a bandsaw on that thing and cut it open.
They have they have done that to some of the hands, some of the fingers. Now, let me say, I am not 100% convinced that these things are real. Okay, I'm slightly leaning in that direction based on my first impressions. I'm not willing to conclusively say these things are real. I don't know. I mean, the data is compelling. I'm leaning in that direction, but at the same time, I reserve the right to backpedal and say, whoa, these things are fake.
More testing needs to be done.
Exactly, because I mean, I know they can make really, really, really convincing hoaxes.
Very much so.
And
the key here is the internal organs. If they, this is why, I mean, you can clear this up in a half an hour. I mean, cut that thing open. And, if you got 150 of them or whatever, cut one of the big guys open.
Exactly.
If there's no internal organs, I mean, it's just like moving in the ufology when they did this so-called alien autopsy, which was a complete hoax, in my opinion. I mean, it just didn't jive. It looks real, but it's not real.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's just, wow.
Yeah, I mean, and I hope I'm getting his name right, Dr. John McDowell. I'm almost positive I am. He is trying to get the Peruvian government to allow some of the larger mummies. He's not interested in the small ones, by the way. Him and his team are not interested. I'm not either. They're not interested in the small ones. I'm not interested in the small ones. But he's trying to get the government to allow him and his team to bring a few of the larger mummies here to the States so that they can do more extensive testing with better technology in their labs. And he's been working on that behind the scenes. I don't know if he's going to get anywhere with that. But it should be noted that I was told, and Zuniga told me, and I've been told by other sources that gigantic hands, 3-fingered hands have been discovered, like huge, gigantic 3-fingered hands. And Zuniga thinks at least one of these hands is real. I didn't get to see it. Zuniga thinks one of them's real, but I've been told that at least one of them has been proven to be fake. So, like I said, everything's all convoluted around these mummies, but the data is real. That I know. I can tell you that because of Zuniga and because of McDowell and because of the other professors at the University of Ica. The data is real. So if it ends up being a hoax, then we're looking at the most complex, ingenious hoax in the history of archaeology. I mean, the detail that whoever, if these are hoaxes, the detail that they went to, the amount of detail that they put into these mummies to make sure that the bones and the sinew and the way that everything is connected, there's no epoxy. And I think there was epoxy, right? With the
with the ferry, there was epoxy once we opened it up. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You have to have epoxy. So if you have a composite of different creatures, you got to glue those pieces together somehow, right?
Somehow.
This is definitive. There is no artificial substances at all in the mummies. Everything is organic. There's no epoxy. There's no metal aside from the implants. There's no wire. There's nothing except for organic material. That's a fact.
The implants to me are incredibly intriguing, very intriguing. That's something that I wasn't aware of. I only wish that, good archaeology is if you find something, you're photographing it in situ, and you open that up so everybody can see what's there. This is where we found it. We're not making it. This is why the junk, and I call it junk with all due respect, coming out of so-called caves in Mexico. I heard this 20 years ago.
Junk.
And I said, this is total junk. But we never see the cave. We never actually see someone digging it up in situ. I'll just leave it at that.
Even if it's dug up, it doesn't mean that it couldn't have been buried first.
Well, that's exactly true. Exactly true. We'll just let that lie, because that's what I think. A lot of this stuff is just a bunch of hooey. So good archaeology is, if you find something, you're photographing this thing like crazy in situ, and all the artifacts are where you're finding it. Because I'm sure there's other artifacts with these bodies. There's got to be other artifacts. Why aren't we seeing those?
There are. Okay. I've been told that there are, but they're being very quiet about it all. Again, what I've been told is there's a front, and that front is huaqueros, grave robbers. Yes, they were involved to some extent. That's true, but there's this front being put out there to keep more huaqueros off the trail.
Right.
And B, to keep the Ministry of Culture from interfering and these guys get in trouble. So there's a big question mark over these things. I am not interested in the small ones. I'm definitely much more convinced that the small ones are not. I wouldn't call them hoaxes and I wouldn't call them fake. I would say they're ancient dolls. Yeah. I think they're ancient artifacts, but I think they're dolls.
They're emulating the big guys.
Right. And they're buried with the big ones for whatever reason. And they're not in the fetal position, by the way. And like I told you, as you know, all the Paracus nobility were buried in the fetal position. That's the tradition. That's how the big ones are buried in the fetal position. So you would think if the little ones were real, they would also be buried in the fetal position. But they're not. So it's, I think it's at the very least, of course, I can't know. I can only know what the data says and what the professors in Peru say and my own observations. But if these things are real, this is the most, let's call it the most magnitudinous discovery in human history.
I would agree. This is another species.
It's another species. It is. It's not human. No, it's real. It's not human.
Very intriguing stuff.
And it could answer the question. It could solve the puzzle of the Paracus people. Yep. Where did they get their elongated skull? From these tridactyls, right? And I don't know. You could extrapolate that thought out to Egypt and the other places around the world, the Black Sea area, where the Levant, where some elongated skulls have been discovered. Is there a crypto-terrestrial subterranean race inhabiting the Earth still?
Yes, that's just stuff on is right there.
That's the real question.
That's unbelievable. Tim, thanks so much for coming on the record. How do people get in touch with you, get your book, sign up on your website and all that?
I'm everywhere, social media, just Timothy Alberino, my YouTube channel, Timothy Alberino. I have a members community, which is the alberinoanalysis.com. And I am going to be, by the way, publishing, I'm going to be doing a detailed, in-depth video on the mummies with all the images and video that we took there. The interview with Dr. Zuniga.
Wow.
Talked to him in Spanish. I'm going to publish that. I'm also going to publish the megaliths. We discovered there's some pretty compelling megaliths that have been discovered in the jungle.
Wow.
And we went out and looked at those. And I think there's a lost city, a lost megalithic city out in this area of the jungle we were. That's a whole nother story. So I'll be publishing that on my YouTube channel as well.
Wow. Well, thanks for coming on the record. God bless you folks. God bless you, Tim, for coming on. And wow, there is a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world. That's why we are on the trail of a Nephilim. Thanks for coming on, Tim.
Thanks, LA. Always a pleasure.